Chapter 11 The Selfish Giant. Long, long ago, there lived a giant in a huge castle. He was the most selfish giant on this earth. He never shared his things. His castle had a huge garden. It was a large, lovely garden with soft green grass. Here and there, over the grass, bloomed beautiful flowers. There were trees that bore rich fruits. The birds sat on the trees and sang so sweetly. Students, bloomed means grown fully, and it can be used in a sentence as roses have bloomed in the garden. So children, long ago a giant lived in a huge castle which had a lovely garden with green grass, beautiful flowers, trees and fruits. The garden was so beautiful that the birds used to sit on the trees and sing. But this giant, he was very selfish and never shared his things with anyone. This giant had a friend. The giant's friend invited the selfish giant to his house. The selfish giant accepted the invitation and went to stay with him for few months. Since the giant was away, the children used to go and play in the giant's garden. One day, the giant came back. When he arrived, he saw the children playing in the garden.
"What are you doing here?"
he cried in a very gruff voice, and the children ran away.
"This is my garden,"
said the giant,
"and I will not allow anybody to play in it."
So he built a high wall all around it and put up a notice board, "Trespassers will be prosecuted." Students, arrived means reaching to a place, especially at the end of a journey. Gruff means deep and rough, often sounding unfriendly. Built means made something. Trespassers means people who go onto someone's land without permission. Prosecuted means officially charged somebody with a crime in court. So children, the selfish giant had a friend who invited him to stay with him, and the selfish giant accepted the invitation and went to stay at his friend's house for few months. And when the giant was not around, the children who used to live near the castle used to go and play in the beautiful garden. One day, when the giant came back to his castle, he saw that the children were playing in his garden, and he got angry. So he shouted on them, and the children got scared and ran away. Students, the giant was so angry that he said that he will not allow anyone to play in his garden, and he built a high wall around his garden so that nobody should enter the garden, and also he placed a notice board outside the garden which said, "Trespassers will be prosecuted," which means whosoever will enter the garden will be punished. The poor children had now nowhere to play. They tried to play on the road, but the road was very dusty and full of hard stones, and they did not like it. How happy we were there! they said to each other. Children, dusty means something which is covered with dry dirt, which is like powder. Like the floor gets dusty due to storm. So students, the children who ran from the garden had no place to play. So they tried to play on the road. But it was hard and dusty and they did not like it. And now they were sad and they were discussing that how happy they used to be when they used to play in the beautiful garden of the giant. Then spring came and all over the country there were beautiful flowers and little birds. Only in selfish giant's garden it was still winter. The birds did not sing in it. No flowers bloomed. Everyone was sad. The only people who were pleased were snow and frost. Snow covered the grass with her big white cloak, and the frost painted all the trees white. I cannot understand why spring is so late in my garden, thought the selfish giant as he sat at the window and looked out at his cold white garden. I hope there will be a change in the weather. But spring did not come. Then autumn gave golden fruits to every garden, but to the giant's garden she gave none. Students, spring here means the spring season, which comes between winter and summer. Also, snow, frost and winter in this are depicted as people, and this is a figure of speech which we call personification. Students, cloak means a thing that hides or covers something. You can use it in a sentence as she placed a cloak over her shoulders to protect herself from cold. It's like a blanket. So students, the spring season had arrived and there were beautiful flowers and birds all over the country except for the garden which was in the selfish giant's castle. It was still winter in the giant's castle. The garden, which was once beautiful, was now cold and there were no birds or flowers. Everything there was covered with snow and frost. And by looking at the garden, the giant thought that why the spring season was so late in his garden, and he hoped that the season will change in his garden someday. But the time passed and the seasons changed from spring to summer, from summer to autumn in the country, but it remained winter in the giant's garden. One morning, the giant was lying awake in the bed when he heard some lovely music. It sounded very sweet to his ears. A bird was singing in his beautiful garden. It was so long since he had heard a bird sing in his garden. I believe spring has come at last, said the giant as he jumped out of the bed and looked out. What did he see? He saw the most wonderful sight. Through a little hole in the wall, the children had crept in and they were sitting on the branches of the trees. On every tree he could see there was a little child. The trees were so glad to have the children back again, and they had covered themselves with flowers and were waving their arms gently above the children's heads. Birds were flying about and twittering with delight. Flowers were looking up through the green grass and laughing. It was a lovely scene. The children were playing and laughing. They looked so happy. Students, crept means moved gradually without getting easily noticed. And you can use it in a sentence as a cat crept into the kitchen through the window. Glad means happy or pleased. And we may use it as I'm glad to meet you. Students, twittering means sweet sounds that birds make. So students, the giant was lying on his bed one morning when he heard some lovely music, and to his surprise, a bird was singing in his garden. The giant was so happy that he jumped out of his bed and looked out. And he saw that the children had gradually moved inside the garden through a little hole in the wall. And they were sitting on the branches of the trees. And as soon as the children entered the garden, the trees in the garden became happy. The birds in the garden started flying and singing. The grass of the garden got green, and the lovely flowers bloomed in the garden. The garden became so beautiful again. Everything looked so happy and full of life. The giant's heart melted as he looked out. How selfish I have been, he said. Now I know why spring would not come here. I will knock down the wall. My garden shall be the children's playground forever and ever. He was really very sorry for what he had done. So he broke the wall around his garden. Soon his garden was filled with laughter of children. As the years went by, the giant grew old and feeble. He could no longer play with the children. He sat on an armchair and watched the children play. Since then, spring never forgets to visit the giant's garden. Children, melted here means became gentle, and feeble means feeling weak, and we may use it in the sentence as his grandmother is old and feeble. So children, by looking at this happy sight, the giant's heart melted and he realized how selfish he was by keeping the garden all by himself. And he also understood the reason why the spring season did not arrive in his garden. After realizing his mistake, he decided that he will break the wall he had made earlier. And he also decided that he will let children play in his beautiful garden forever. When the giant became old and weak, he sat in the garden and watched children playing in the garden. And students, now his garden remained beautiful forever. So students, towards the end of the story, the giant had learned the importance of sharing and caring. He also realized that happiness always lies in sharing things and caring for others. I hope Now you all must have understood why your school and teachers emphasize on the value of sharing and caring.